My name is Andrew Phillips. The company is the Phillips Group. Most of the people here in attendance are clients of the Phillips Group. The Phillips Group is a technology-forward accounting and tax firm specializing in the healthcare industry. Today, we have with us Anita York. She will be doing the first part of a three-part series on employment law. We do this every year, and it's just a hit every year. So, Anita, how many times have we done this? Do you
know what? About an hour ago, I looked it up. So the first time I did this was almost exactly 10 years ago to the day, February 10th, 2012. So I've been doing it a while.
That's great. And honestly, they've been a hit. They normally sell out. So this is good. And this one, I mean, obviously you can't sell out a webinar. This one has 500 seats available. So, Anita is our employment law attorney for us, for the Phillips Group, and then also for the predecessor company, Phillips Accountancy. And there is, anytime a client comes to us and has a question of, I don't know, somebody has, an independent contractor has an issue, a lab, whatever has an issue, Anita is who we recommend. So, Anita, I'll let you take it away.
Well, yeah, so this has been a long time partnership, which I have loved, and am excited to continue on with you and Laura at the Phillips Group. So good morning, everybody. Glad to have you here. A couple months ago when Andrew and I were first talking about this, we had high hopes for doing an in-person so that people would have the option of coming and being face-to-face, or doing a hybrid so that folks who couldn't attend or chose not to could do it via webinar. And thanks to the bane of my existence, and I'm sure yours also, we are back to webinar. But the good thing about webinars is that, again, folks who wouldn't otherwise be able to make it are here, and we're glad to have everybody here. So just by way of background, welcome again. Andrew sent me the registration list yesterday, and I see lots of familiar names, but also lots of new names. And so I always love to welcome new folks to the fold, and hope that you'll get something out of today's program. So by way of background for me, I've been an employment lawyer for about 25 years now. And prior to that, I was in business for many years as operations manager, kind of higher level manager overseeing operations. So part of what I enjoy in my role as an employment lawyer is that I've been there. I've run the businesses. I've had the problem employees. I've had the employees who came and complained about sexual harassment, and we had to deal with that. So I've been where you are, not as a dentist by any stretch, but as a business owner and as a business manager. So I hope that brings to the table. I'll tell you as we go along, and I tell you war stories. Almost all of the war stories I'm going to tell you are our own experiences, the things that we do wrong, the experiences we've had, both prior to my becoming a lawyer and since. Let me start with one. One of my very favorite jobs ever was as an operations manager for a wholesale wine distributorship. So we had a Northern California office, Southern California office. The sales manager and I started the Southern California office, hired everybody, trained everybody. This is our team, our group. And it turned out that our warehouse manager was stealing wine, taking it out of the inventory so he could sell it off of the truck separately and make a little side business, side money there. So once we fired him, hired the next guy, he lasted several months. And then when we had to fire him when we found out he was an alcoholic.
Wow.
Yeah, not a great way to start with a whole wine
distributor.
Yeah, exactly right. So, but it was really like the best job ever. Our sales meetings once a month were wine tastings. It was fabulous. So, fast forward about 15 years, I'm in my mid 30s, decide, I either need to go for an MBA or a law degree or something. I need to kind of keep moving up the corporate ladder, so to speak. And I obviously chose law school, got to law school and learned, there's a specialty called employment law. Well, that's great because I've been a manager for all these years and I already know a bunch of that stuff. Well, you go to law school and you learn all the things you didn't know and all the ways that I could have gotten all those companies sued. And certainly if I was managing those companies the way I did today, the way that I was managing them back in the 70s and 80s, I think I just aged myself, I would have gotten them sued for sure today, like no question about it. So part of what you learn through all that process, and part of what you all know, and probably why you're spending your morning here with us this morning, is because being a boss is no small thing. And certainly here in California, where we have 8 volumes of labor code that you're supposed to know, plus regulations, plus case, all sorts of things that you're supposed to know and never make a mistake, you have quite a job on your hands being an employer, not just managing your own business, but also managing all of those employees. And again, that's no small burden. I know that, you know that, there's lots and lots to know. So my goal for today is the following. We are going to today do what we call Employment Law 101, documentation, discipline, discharge, which is what I call kind of cradle to grave, the art of the managing the employment relationship. Next month, we're going to talk about Employment Law 102, all the really not fun wage and hour stuff. But oftentimes, even in this program, I'll end up with questions about wage and hour stuff because it is truly the most, probably the most dangerous area of all. And then in March, we're going to do Employment Law 103, which is kind of hot topics. We're going to talk about reasonable accommodation, leaves of absence. Dentists oftentimes get that stuff wrong, giving too much time off. Sometimes not enough, but more often than not, too much time off. And then they call me when somebody's been out for 6, 7, 8 months. What can I do? So we're going to talk about that. So let's get started with today's program. A few housekeeping things first. As Andrew mentioned, please put your questions in the Q&A. That's what he'll be monitoring to let me know when there's questions there for folks. And we do have a few spots in the program where I'll be specifically asking for questions. At the end of the program, you can go ahead and put questions in there that are not related to anything we're talking about today. If at the end of the program, which I'm shooting for about 2 hours, we have time, and I anticipate we will, I'll take whatever other questions that I can. Although I will say if they're questions that we're going to handle in February, March, I'm probably not going to spend time on those today. We'll invite you back and hope you'll come back to join us for those programs. Also in the chat is my email address. You can always email me and ask me questions if you want to, because this is a public forum. So if you have something you want to chat about that's not so in a not so public way, you can just email me, let me know that. Throughout the program, I'll be showing you in the handout, you'll have forms that we'll be talking about. If you would like me to send those electronically to you, for example, the employment application so that you can put your name on it and use it, you can email me and ask me for the forms. Happy to send those to you. And I think that's it. We will be giving CEs for this. My assistant handles those, and I will tell you she's slammed busy with my work right now. So it will probably be a good 2, maybe even 3 weeks before you get them. But if you're here for the 2-hour program, you will get them. In the past, we've done polling as we go along. We're not doing that today. Andrew now has the ability to actually have the program tell us who was on and how long they were on, and that will enable us to give you the CEs. And if anybody ever comes back and questions me, my provider license isn't at risk because we can monitor it that way. So that makes things much easier. All right, let me start with a share screen. That hopefully will work out well. All right, yay, it worked. Always love it when it works, when the technology works, and that's not always the case with me. All right, so today's agenda, which we're almost done with. Introduction, somebody lost so little time. So as I was saying, there are so many things that you are all supposed to know and never make a mistake. In our handout that you should have in front of you, or you can download it from the chat, pages 1 through 4 is an annual mailing that we do, emailing that we do with the new laws. If you want to get on our email list, again, when you email me, you can email me for forms, you can email me and say, put me on your email list. We send out things like this. We're not prolific with these things. You will not get very many emails from us, I promise you. But we will send out emails at the beginning of each year with these new laws. So just about done with the introductory wrap up introduction. Then we'll move on to pre-employment, hopefully give you some hiring tips, open up your eyes to some red flags that maybe you hadn't thought about before to hopefully help you get the right people in the door. New hires, we're going to talk to you for just a few minutes about onboarding and kind of what that should look like. We're going to spend the bulk of today's program on active management and the 3 strikes, and hopefully I'm going to give you some motivation, some incentives, some tools, some ideas, some food for thought to maybe help you be a little bit more effective manager than you are today. Termination, of course, we'll talk about that, important steps before, during, and after. And the after is post-termination, all sorts of kinds of things might happen post-termination, like unemployment claims, attorney letters, things like that. So let's jump into it, beginning with pre-employment, hiring tips and red flags. So what I want you to think about in this process of hiring somebody, pre-hiring somebody, is really expanding how you think about the process itself as an investigation. Not just an interview, not just looking at the resume and then crossing your fingers and hoping it all works out, but really I want you to take the opportunity at every step to really examine and investigate and look for those red flags, look for the things that are right, look for the things that might not be right. I'm going to tell you multiple times today, don't ignore your gut and hopefully get that right person in the door. And I know that that's never been more difficult than it is today, because I've been hearing from dentists for the last year and a half how tough it is, not just dentists, everybody, but certainly dentists, how difficult it is to get people in the door when you're trying to hire somebody. And so to that end, I also want you to use every step as an opportunity for you to make a great impression on that candidate, make them want to choose you. You know, what's that movie? I forget which movie it is, where she says, choose me, choose me. You are competing, right? You are competing for that person, for the best people. So you need to be selling this person on why they want to work for you, why they want to work at your practice, why they want to work with your team, why they want to be treating your patients. I want you to think about every step of this as an opportunity for you to learn about that candidate and really make a great impression, so that candidate says, oh, hands down, I want to go to work for Dr. Phillips. Why wouldn't I? There's no place, it doesn't look like there's any better place to be. So think about those as we go along. So of course, we're going to start out with looking at the resumes. You may be, and I'm getting a lot of questions these days about how do we even get people to apply? And I wish I had a good answer for you. There used to be a person in the dental field who did recruiting and placements for dentists, and I just reached out to her recently, and she's not doing that anymore. So I don't have a great answer for you other than the same thing we all do. You know, we go on Indeed, or we go on to, some other apps. You go on to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is usually a good source. Talk to people, offer your employees some incentive to get a referral in the door. All those sorts of things to try and get yourself at least a pool of candidates to be looking at. So one way or the other, you're going to have those resumes. And some of them will be great. Some of them you're going to look at and say, oh my gosh, we have to have this person. This is exactly what we need. He has all the right background. He has all the right skills. Some of those resumes you can look at and think, did you not read the ad at all? You have no idea what kind of job you're applying for. And I know this from personal experience. We get the same thing. We run these ads and we get some of the resumes we get, I think, out of work hairdresser. No, that's not exactly what we're looking for. So those are sort of the ones that go in the easy piles, right? The easy pile of we won't even consider, the easy pile of, oh my gosh, I hope we can get this person. And then there's all the ones in the middle of maybe yes, maybe no, need to talk to them, need to find out more. So as you're looking at that resume, again, we're doing an investigation. We're using every step of the process to do that, beginning with that resume or that cover letter, or both. So you're going to thoroughly and critically read it in detail, not just skim it. Get information from there. Are there errors? Do you care? Are there spelling errors? Do you care? Is there a gap in time? If so, that's something you'll definitely want to ask about and find out why there's a gap in time. Does this person seem to be doing two jobs at once? Does that matter? What are their current activities? In other words, their current position or their current, whatever they have listed on there as current. All good areas for asking questions, but be aware of what it all says. Carefully analyze everything. I have on here carefully analyze the description. So I'll give you my first, here's how we messed up story. We had a long time dental assistant, legal assistant. She'd probably been with us 10, 15 years. And we always knew that she'd be leaving at a certain time frame because it was when her son was graduating from high school and she wanted to move back east to be closer to her aging parents. So we knew the day was coming. We're interviewing for replacements, and we interviewed a gal who we ended up hiring. And she was quite young. She's probably 20, 21. And we knew that we were going to have to train her in all of the legal things, but she had the right administrative background. She had the right typing skills. She knew the software programs. And surprisingly, she'd been working for an insurance company in their legal department. And surprisingly, she said she knew discovery. So in my world, discovery is when there's litigation, when there's a lawsuit. Discovery is the process by which the parties spend months, oftentimes, sending questions back and forth that the parties have to answer, demanding documents that the parties have to produce, doing depositions that the parties all have to go to. That whole part of the process is called discovery. So she knew discovery. So in her interview, we confirmed, you know discovery, right? She said, yep, I've done lots of discovery. So we hired her. We give her first litigation discovery project, and she has absolutely no idea what she's doing. And we said, well, you said you'd done discovery. Well, what she had done was process the executive's discovery credit card expense reports, not remotely close to what we needed to have done. So as you're reading that resume and as you're going to be talking to folks, carefully analyze the descriptions, make sure you understand what they mean, ask about them in more detail if that's something that's important to you. The very last item on this slide is notes and questions. So you're going to write on that resume, all your notes, all your questions, the things, but be aware that this is all discoverable. So someday at the end of the story, there could be an end to the employment relationship that isn't good. Or even if it is good, that employee may someday decide that they want to come after you for some reason. And part of that process will be discovery, in which case they get to ask for a copy of their personnel file and you have to produce everything that's in it. Now, as you're writing around that resume and that resume is going to the personnel file, that resume should have notes and questions that are all perfectly appropriate, lawful, okay for anybody to see. If not, then you will eventually want to throw that resume away, but print out another good one to keep one good, clean resume in that personnel file because, as we'll talk about later, we want to have a good personnel file on everybody. We don't want to have them say, well, I gave them a resume, it's not in the file. That then begs the question, what all is missing from the file? Why is it missing from the file? So my first suggestion is just make notes that are all perfectly appropriate. Don't put age ? Instead put experience ? So that it's all good in the file. All right, so we now have the stack of folks who we think are good potential candidates. I always advise doing an initial telephone pre-screen. You're going to call them anyways to schedule the interview to have them come in. Or I hope you're going to, because this is part of the investigation process. So you make that telephone call, maybe they answer the phone, maybe they don't. Hopefully they'll answer the phone, because what I'd like to hear is when they're not expecting you to call, how does it go? How do they answer the phone? They may someday be answering your phones. Pay attention to how they answer their own phone. Is their voice bright and cheerful? And does it sound like it's going to be a good person representing your dental practice? Or was it, hi, hello, how is it? Hopefully, if they've answered the phone, you're going to introduce yourself. You're going to explain why you're calling, that you've gotten the resume in response to your ad for a dental assistant. And if they have just a couple of moments, you'd like to ask just a couple of quick questions. Hopefully they're going to handle that well. And again, you're learning now, how do they respond when they weren't expecting your call? Do they know who you are? Or are you just one of the 27 applications they put in and they actually have no idea who you are? And that may be okay. But again, this is all just part of the information for you. Look on that resume, pick something you want to ask a question about, just again, so that you can use this as part of your investigation process. Now, in particular, if there's anything in that resume that may rule out that candidate, now's a great time to ask it. Don't waste your time. Don't waste their time having them come in if there's something to rule them out. So in our search for a legal assistant, one of the folks in the pile of, oh my gosh, like this person's fabulous, was a gentleman who had a lot of great background, but it looked like he was looking to move into a paralegal role. So for us, the analogy for you might be a front office person who's looking to move into an office manager role. Now, you may very well have an office manager role coming up, and that may be exactly why you're hiring this person, because in 1 year your office manager is retiring, and you would love for that to be someone who can move into that role. On the other hand, you may know that your office manager is your spouse or is your sister or is your brother, and they're probably not going anywhere. And so if that resume looks like it's somebody who's going to want an office manager position, let's suss that out right now in a telephone pre-screen rather than having them come in. So come up with something to ask them, get a little bit of information from them. You decide that you want to move forward. You're going to schedule that interview. Great. Can you come in for an interview? I see you have a current position. Is there a day that you don't work or a day that you're going to be more available than another day? And by the way, when you come in, why don't you come in about 15 minutes early because we're going to have you fill out an employment application. And would you do me a favor? Would you bring me a couple of hard copies of your resume? Now, my note on here is give some instructions. I want you to give instructions because I simply want to know, will they follow instructions? I don't necessarily need them there 15 or 10 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. And I don't necessarily need them to bring me a hard copy of their resume. I want to know, will they follow my instructions? Or will they, oh shoot, I forgot. Or if I ask them to come in 15 minutes ahead of time, do they arrive 5 minutes ahead of time? That's probably a really good signal to you about someone who's going to have a tardiness issue in the future. So give instructions, see if they follow those instructions. Again, take notes during this pre-screen. Be aware that those notes may someday be discoverable. But do take notes. You may be calling 5 people and you want to make sure you're not mixing them up. Okay, so now we're going to prepare for that person to come in for the interview. So part of that preparation is deciding who's going to interview that person. Clearly, you are going to interview that person. There's no question about that. But in our law firm, as is probably the same in your dental practice, we're a small group of about 10, 12 people, depending on how you count at any given time. And so with a small group, we've got some attorneys, some assistants, receptionists, billing person. It's really important that we all work well together as a team. We all communicate well together. We all jive well together. We all support each other, hopefully with minimal drama, hopefully with minimal egos and, sort of competing for whatever. We need a team that's going to work well together. So our process is we have every single person interview any candidate who appears to be a viable candidate. And here's what I mean by that. We've looked at the resume, we've done a telephone pre-screen, we've scheduled them to come in and given them some instructions. And then I usually begin the interview process, or one of the other senior attorneys begins the interview process. If it goes well in that first interview, right, the first person that interviews, then we have everybody interview that person. If it doesn't go well, then we just thank them so much for coming in, let them know we're interviewing some other folks, and we'll let them know when we're done with the process, if we need them to come back in or need anything more from them. And I've done that where I've done that first interview and there's no way we're hiring this person and we don't need to waste their time or everybody else's time. But for the most part, we've got the resume, we've done the telephone pre-screen, we know that we're interested in this individual. So we plan for all of our folks to interview that person. Now, we don't make them sit through 12 interviews. We have interviews done 2 or 3 people at a time. We do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, save time. Number two, employees who haven't been in management before are uncomfortable doing an interview. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to do it, but they're much more comfortable chatting with 1 or 2 or 3 people all together. So it just makes it for a more comfortable process. Third, you may have some people who are more quiet, some people who are more talkative. You can kind of pair those people up together so that you, again, have an opportunity for a good dialogue. So decide who's going to interview first, decide who's going to be the closer, and then decide who all is going to interview during that process and make sure that you've scheduled it so that that will all work out. So assuming that you're the first person to interview them and possibly the last person, you may also be the closer. Be prepared to give an introduction to the practice. Just 1 minute, kind of here's our background. This, practice was owned for 40 years by a prior doctor. I bought the practice 5 years ago. Since that time, we've expanded and we're continuing to grow, and we're really excited about it. So we're looking to add a dental assistant, and because we've just added an associate, whatever it is, right? Introduction to the practice, introduction to the open position. Why are you looking for somebody? If it's appropriate to explain. You don't want to explain we're looking for somebody because we just fired our last person. But, again, this is an opportunity for you to make a great impression also and to make them feel comfortable being here. In preparing for the interview, I do want you to plan ahead the questions that you're going to ask. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go down a list and have to check every one, but be prepared to know kinds of things that you're going to want to ask. And some of those will come from the resume, and some of those will just come from questions that you're going to set up for yourself. Prepare for the ending of the interview. Again, who's that going to be? And be prepared to advise the candidate with what to expect next. Okay, so we've done our telephone pre-screen. We've prepared for the interview. The person's coming in for the interview. I hadn't even thought about it. You might be doing some of these interviews by Zoom. Hopefully not. Hopefully you're going to have the person come in, and even if you're all masked and distanced, sitting across the room from each other, that works perfectly fine. So that you, again, kind of get a better feel for them. All right, so interview process. Begin with a current legally compliant employment application. If you have an employment application form that is more than about 1 or 2 years old, throw it away, throw away every copy of it, delete it from your computer so it can never accidentally be used. You need to have a current employment application. And on pages 5 and 6 of your handout is a good current employment application. Again, if you want it, just email me and ask me for it. I'll send it to you. It's in Word, so you can modify it, you can change it, you can add things to it. You may have a form that you really like certain things on it, but this one's lawful, so use this one and modify it. So why do we want folks to fill out an employment application if they're bringing in a resume? Why do we need to do both? Because every step of the process is more information for you in your investigation. So as you're looking at that employment application, you're going to look for red flags. You're going to look for things like, did they answer the questions? Did they not answer the questions? If they didn't answer the questions, why didn't they answer the questions? And do you care? Did they not answer the questions because they submitted a resume so they thought they didn't have to, even though you asked them to do it? That's interesting information. Did they answer the questions in a way that's different than what's on their resume? That's an interesting thing to think about. Did they answer the questions in a way that is incomplete, sloppy? Is their handwriting horrible? Do you care? Maybe they're never going to handwrite anything. You don't care. Look at all the things on that application to make a decision about whether or not there's information that might be helpful to you. So more information for your investigation. Look at those red flags. Don't ignore them. We lawyers love to have at will language. As you can see on page 6, it kind of ends with at will language. Now, your employment application can no longer ask anything about criminal history background. It cannot say, have you ever been convicted of a felony, like our old applications did. It also cannot ask what was your salary, your hourly rate, your compensation, or your benefits at any prior job. I hope you all know that. New law a couple of years ago in California. And by the way, the criminal history is the law in many states now. The compensation question is starting to become more common. So no criminal history questions on your application, no compensation questions in terms of their history, but you absolutely may ask what is their desired compensation. And as you'll see on this application sample that I have for you, we do ask that. It's an important question. All right, so again, red flags. Do they follow directions? Are there unanswered items? If so, why? And you can just say to them, I see you didn't answer this. Why didn't you answer it? Just flat out ask, why didn't you answer it? Let's see what they say. Let's see how they respond. And again, let's let them learn from you that you do look at these things. It wasn't just an exercise in futility. You actually paid attention to what they were doing. Other red flags, errors, dates, gaps. So let me tell you another one of our stories. So our stories seem to all come from looking for legal assistance. We had this legal assistant for many years. We had 2 for many years. And then we went through probably half a dozen of them in just a few years. And now we're back to having legal assistants for several years, but we definitely made our mistakes along the way. So we were all interviewing this one person, and she had about a 1.5 year gap on her dates on her resume. And so when we asked her about it, she said, she was through an agency. So through an agency means we're paying probably $5,000 or $10,000 for her, right? Depending on what her compensation is and what the percentage is for the agency, but we're paying a goodly sum. So she said, the agency did the resume. They must have just made a mistake. Okay, fair enough. I wish she'd caught it, but okay. So we finished up all the interviews. We all loved her. We all thought she was terrific. So I closed with, okay, so we're going to check, we'd like to check references. And so from your resume, I see the former employers, or your job application. I have the former employer, sorry, your employment application with the phone numbers, any reason I can't call them. She said, well, the last one doesn't give references, but the rest of them, should give a reference. I think, okay, that's kind of strange. By the way, in one of my former lives before becoming a lawyer, I was a recruiter for 5 minutes. Hated that job, but learned a lot. So in that, because I was a recruiter and because I'm a bit of a control freak, I do all of the reference checks, even when we're paying $10,000 to an agency. I want to do them myself. So I call and do the reference check, and this person who I got doing the reference check from the last employer said, we can't give you a reference on that person. And I'm still sort of thinking to myself, I don't even know what that means. What do you mean you can't, like, did she not work there? So I'm mulling this around in my head. And she says, but can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She said, have you checked your criminal background? Not yet, but thank you so much for your time. Now, this was back before there were any limits on your ability to check criminal backgrounds. You were allowed to do it any time. And so I immediately, being a lawyer, got on and went onto the court website and started looking at criminal background. And sure enough, she'd been convicted and spent something like 15 months in prison for embezzlement. So look at the dates, look at the gaps. I'll talk in a few minutes about reference checks. Do the reference checks. Don't ignore those red flags. Pay attention to it, follow up on it, figure it out. Again, descriptions of duties, you definitely want to be looking at that. Make notes. It's all discoverable. All right, we're finally conducting the interview. So we have our questions. When we prepared for the interview, we prepared some in advance, some from the resume, some that we just kind of figured were things that we wanted to ask. So I like starting out with sort of the easy questions, the work history, right? So start out with the questions from the resume, and that gives them sort of an ability to warm up with things that they know the answers to easily, and to get a dialogue going and talk about the history of their experience. And after a certain period of time, then I want you to move on, and I want you to move on to more open-ended questions. Again, I want you to get a dialogue going. So start out easy, get them relaxed, and then more open-ended. So on page 7 of your handout is a whole bunch of questions, not because I want you to ask a whole bunch of questions. Pick 3 of them, pick 5 of them, whatever that work for that particular interview. Again, just to get a dialogue going. Or don't pick any of them. If you have your own, fabulous. But again, the concept is we've got the easy questions to start out, build the rapport, and then the more open-ended to get a dialogue going and see how does that go. To a certain extent, I want you to let that conversation go where it goes, because again, that's what when you're going to learn about that person. What you may learn is that they talk constantly and you can't get a word in edgewise. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not okay. Maybe what you'll learn is that they're really shy and really quiet and really reserved, and they're just kind of answering the questions that you ask and not much more. Maybe that's okay. What is the culture and the personality of your practice? Are you all pretty high energy, pretty intense, pretty type A? So a person who's really shy and quiet is just going to struggle? Or are you all pretty mellow and easygoing and you like the calm, and someone who's going to come in being super intense is just going to drive you all nuts? So what works for you? Figure that out. Does it feel like this person is going to be a good fit with your practice's personality, your practice's culture? All right. Just as important as learning what to ask is learning what not to ask. So on pages 8 through 11, the Department of Fair Employment and Housing has given us a really good little primer on the discriminatory areas that you should never be asking about, certainly not in a job interview, maybe not even with employees, probably not even with employees, although it may come up in conversations, but definitely never ever with candidates. Now, we talked about having everybody interview folks, or at least having several of your staff interview folks. Give them a copy of the handouts at pages 7 through 11, all 5 of those pages. Handout 7 will give them some ideas for questions they can ask and things that they can do, or at least give them the bullet points that have those questions. Pages 8 through 11 will make sure they don't accidentally get you into trouble by saying, Oh, are you married? Oh, do you have kids? What church do you go to? When did you graduate high school, right? Let them know what questions they should not be asking so that they don't accidentally get you into trouble. All right, so we're doing the interview. We prepared for it. We're conducting it. We've decided who else is going to interview. We've gotten all through that. We're ending the interview when appropriate. Maybe it's after they've talked with everybody. Maybe it's after we've talked with some people. Maybe it's after they've just talked with you. Now, what we do in our firm, when folks are interviewing, I'm usually the one kind of running the interview process. And so when they get done with the interview, they just kind of come by my office and they give me a thumbs up, meaning, yep, loved them. Thumb sideways, they're fine. No objection, not super excited, but no objection. Or thumbs down, like that did not go well. And that gives me a sense of how to end the interview, right? That gives me a sense of whether we're probably going to be really excited about this person, or we're probably going to be passing on them. And that definitely colors the way I end that interview process. So when they're done and gone, then we certainly have more lengthy conversations, and we may even all gather in the conference room and chat about how it went. But at that moment in time, I at least have a sense of how to end that interview process. All right, so we've finished the interviews. We've decided that we're interested in the person. And so we're really now going to focus in on all of the data we've gathered so far. So again, feedback from everybody who interviewed that person. I am now going to re-review that resume based on what I now know. I'm going to re-review that employment application based on what I now know. I'm going to look at my notes and see where my questions answered. I cannot emphasize enough. Do not disregard the red flags and do not ignore your gut. It is too often the case that we're desperate to hire somebody. We need to get somebody in, and that person seemed like they'd be just fine. We bring them in 3-4 months when it's just not working out. No matter how hard we've tried to train them or to counsel them or whatever it is, it's just not a good fit. And when we think back to that interview process, we think, I should have known. I should have known when blah, 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 that was going to be a problem, right? Don't ignore your gut. I know you're anxious to get somebody in, especially now when people are hard to find. And I'm not saying that you're not going to compromise and choose somebody who may not be everything that you want them to be, but don't ignore your gut. If they're not everything you want them to be on skills or on experience, you can teach them, you can train them, you can have training, you can hire somebody to train them on EagleSoft or whatever you need. But don't ignore your gut. If it feels like there was an issue, if it feels like they might not be a great fit, if it feels like they might be a bit of a prima donna, or it feels like they might be a bit dramatic, or it feels like maybe they were bad-mouthing their former employers and that's not a great thing to do, whatever. Don't ignore it. Pay attention to it. Don't get yourself into a situation where 6 months, 12 months from now, you're dealing with a disgruntled employee who you're having to fire, who's now asking for their personnel file, and you're calling me saying, I never should have hired this person, but I did, and now I'm in kind of a mess. So as you're doing that, what's most important to you? Skills? Maybe so. Team fit? Maybe so. Potential for growth? Maybe so. Other things? You'll decide what your priorities are and evaluate on that basis. Reference checks, I've already chatted for a moment about them. Do them yourself. You may be surprised. In about an hour from now, I'm going to be talking to you about when post-termination, when future potential employers call you for a reference check. I'm going to suggest that you not give very much information, give dates of employment, give their position held, don't give much more. But we're at the beginning of the process. So at the beginning of the process, when you're trying to get a reference check, I want you to get as much information as you can. So do them yourself. Use this as part of the investigation process. And here's what I mean. When you call and you ask for that reference check, if you get a human being on the phone to talk with you, ask for dates of employment, ask for their position, listen to the tone of voice, listen to how it sounds. Do they sound happy? Do they sound like they're happy to be giving you this information? And hopefully you can be able to ask a few more questions. So on page 13 of your handout, I've given you some reference check questions, and the same concept applies. We start with the easy ones and then move into something that's still easy, but maybe they're willing to answer. So as a front office person for you, what were her duties? We use EagleSoft. Did she use EagleSoft when she worked for you? Did we use Dentrix? Did she use Dentrix when she worked for you? They're easy questions. Hopefully that person's going to get comfortable answering them. And then you can move into, well, how did they get along with all their coworkers? Did patients love him? Did you have any problems? I'm just trying to figure out if they'd be a good fit for our business. See what you can get out of them. All right, so we've done all that. We decided we're going to make an offer. We're very happy to be doing so. And we may consider as part of that process a working interview. Working interviews are terrific, and I know a lot of dental offices do them, particularly for clinical staff. Let's see how that hygienist cleans teeth. Let's see how that dentist treats patients, what have you. That's perfectly good. Now, a working interview where that person is actually performing some service that benefits you, that is working. Working must be paid. So if you're going to have them treat a patient, assist you with a patient, schedule a patient, do anything that at the end of the day, that's something that one of your employees would have been doing, you must pay them for that time. Now, if you're going to have them come in and clean your teeth so you can see how they do, you probably don't need to pay them for that. If you're going to have them come in and just watch, probably don't need to pay them for that. But if they're going to be doing anything, which in most working interviews they are, most working interviews you're going to have them doing some service and you're going to be watching and listening, that has to be paid. So I want you to, in a few minutes, we're going to go through an offer letter for actually extending the offer. You can modify that to be an offer letter just for a working interview, just for one day. Come in on January 21st at 9 a.m. We'll have you work until 12, and we're going to pay you $20 an hour for that time. We're going to have you work from 9 to 5. We're going to take a 1-hour lunch. I'd love to take you to lunch if you want. If not, it'll be your time to do as you wish. And we're going to pay you $20 an hour. So treat it as they're an employee of sorts. Now, legally speaking, technically speaking, they are an employee, not of sorts. They are actually an employee of yours for that day. And technically speaking, they should be put on payroll. They should get a paycheck. Like all these things should happen. I know that that's not realistic. I know you're not going to do that, but at the very least, do something in writing that says what you're offering them in this working interview, pay them for their time, and pay them at the end of that day, because the way the law is written, all wages must be paid on the last day of work. You may decide you're not going to hire that person, in which case that working interview is their last day of work. So you must pay them on that day. So at the very least, just write a check out of the general account for the number of hours at whatever that hourly rate was that you decided you were going to pay them. Now, I want you to be aware that when you're hiring somebody, you're hiring them as an employee. A temp is not somebody who you're trying out to see if it works. A contract worker, a 1099, is not somebody who you're hiring to see if it works. You cannot falsify when you're hiring somebody their status as an employee. When you're hiring them, they are an employee. A temp is somebody who you're bringing on with the full intention of it only being temporary, no intention of them ever becoming a regular employee. That's what a temp is. A 1099 contract worker, which we're going to talk about in detail next month, is somebody who is not working for your practice at all. They're doing some extraneous service. So when you're bringing somebody in and you're doing a working interview, I want that to be in writing. When you're hiring them as an employee, not as a temp, not as a 1099. So we're now thinking about extending the offer. So all sorts of things go into that. Number one, what's the pay structure? Is it salaried? Is it hourly? Again, next month, we're going to talk a lot about that. It's not as simple as you think. It's not just a matter of you deciding which one you want it to be. There are laws that control which one it is legally permissible to be. I don't want you getting yourselves into trouble. So be here next month. So what's the pay structure? Bonuses. Bonuses, I've always loved bonuses. I've always been a big fan of a bonus plan for all sorts of folks. I think it's incentivizing, it's motivating, they're fun, it's extra money that somebody can earn. But bonuses have become very complicated from a wage and hour standpoint. Again, not going to get into it. We'll talk about that next month. But be aware, don't just offer the bonus without being aware of what that means, what the ramifications of that are. Employee benefits have never been more important than they are now. When we're in a tight job market and we're competing for employees, they're very important. But part of the reason I say they've never been more important than they are now is what we're seeing, particularly from the younger workforce, is that they want quality time away from work. They care about the quality of their lives, probably more than we in my generation did. We in my generation assumed that we'd be working full time for some number of decades, and that was our primary focus and our professional lives, and that our personal lives was, maybe raising kids, maybe not raising kids, maybe getting married, maybe not getting married, but that was kind of the package. Now we have folks who are wanting more than that. They want time off. They want to be able to travel. They want to be able to spend time, quality time, engage in their personal interests. They're valuing other parts of their life, honestly, more than we did. So, and we meaning, again, kind of me and my contemporaries, me and my friends. So as you're competing for those good people, of course, we think about the traditional employee benefits, the paid vacation, the paid holidays. For dental offices, it's dental services that you offer probably for free to your employees, maybe for free to their family members or at a considerable discount. Those are sort of the traditional employee benefits, maybe some for a 401k or other kind of plan like that. But I want you to think beyond the traditionals, and I want you to really get creative here because, again, this is your chance to make a great impression. Here's the way we do things. Not my law firm. I'm just saying, part of what you're introducing to this candidate, here's the way we do things. We have paid vacation, we have paid sick leave, we have paid holidays. In addition to, you'll start out earning 2 weeks of paid vacation a year. But in addition, we offer you the opportunity to take up to 2 weeks of unpaid time off that you can schedule for any reason you want whatsoever. That person may very well value that more, because if perhaps money isn't everything to them, for some people it is, right? For some people, it's all about the money. And so they wouldn't be able to take the unpaid time off because they're paycheck to paycheck. But for some people, if they think, oh man, I can take 2 weeks of vacation paid and 2 weeks of vacation not paid, that's 4 weeks off. I love that. Like I'm stoked and ecstatic. That may be something that you can think about. I know it's hard when people are gone from, especially small businesses, but think about whether that's something that you can swing, that you can do, because that may be the very thing that gets that person to want to come to you instead of that other dental practice. Childcare, if there's a way to help with paying for childcare or providing childcare, I'm going to let the Phillips group advise you on the taxability of all that and how all that works. But assuming that you manage all of that part of it, that may be something that's super valuable to somebody. Pet insurance. Maybe I don't have children at all, but I have 2 dogs. Maybe I pay a lot of money for doggy daycare. Maybe I pay $100 a month for pet insurance. Think about offering things outside of what people normally see. If this is someone who's coming to work for you and they know that there's this package of benefits, and among my options will be, I can choose to have up to $200 a month that's applied to doggy daycare, pet insurance, childcare, AFLAC special insurance that pays for other things, whatever, right? That's maybe something of interest. And it tells that employee that this is an employer that cares about its employees, that goes above and beyond what the normal benefits are. This might be a really cool place to work, right? Sabbaticals, we never see sabbaticals anymore, but a sabbatical historically is a big block of time off, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, that somebody gets at a certain point in their tenure. We see it a lot in academia, in their tenure with you, maybe 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, where they can take up to 3 months unpaid time off to do anything they want. They can bicycle across the country. They can go alpine skiing for the sea, whatever, right? It's unpaid time. And yes, it'll be difficult for you to be without that person. But if I know that in 7 years, I get 3 months off if I want it to do anything I want, I'm probably going to want to hang out for that 7 years and get that sabbatical. Community service, charitable work, paid days off. Again, it may be something that's important to those people. They may be really interested in the fact that once a quarter, you guys close down for the day and you go to Second Harvest Food Bank and you do volunteer work there and they're paid for that time. That may be important to them. And again, it tells them something about you and about what it's like to work for this dental practice. So I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but I think it's super important. And as you're competing for good candidates, these are the kinds of things that may very well be what has that person choose you over somebody else. All right, we're ready to make the offer. I want you to do two things. I want you to call them. I want them to hear from you how excited you are. And I want them to hear from you that everybody loves them. You're super stoked that they, want to work for you. You'll be extending a formal written offer. If you can have their email address, you'll be emailing it today. Here's what it is. Here's what the job is. Here's what the days and the hours. Here's what some of the benefits are. What do they think? Are they interested? Right? Get them to commit at least a little bit. They may say to you, that sounds fabulous, but I have to tell you, I've got this other dentist who's also making me an offer, so I'm going to have to look at both of them. That's good information for you to know. They may say, oh my gosh, I had this other offer, but I so much more wanted to come to work for you. I'm totally stoked. Yes, I'm definitely planning to accept that offer. I can't wait to get the letter. So do it verbally, talk to them, and then follow that up right away with a written offer letter. So on pages 14 to 15 is a sample offer letter. Again, you can modify it as you wish. It's in Word. It'll be in Word if you email me and I send it to you. On page 16 is a conviction history information questionnaire. It is at this stage that you are allowed to ask about their convictions. It's at this stage that you're allowed to ask about their criminal background. So I like sending this with the offer letter. You'll see the offer letter actually references it. So if the person accepts the employment, they sign the letter, they send it back along with that completed conviction history information form. Now, if it turns out that they were in prison for 15 months for embezzlement and they know that they need to disclose that now, they may decide not to accept your job offer. And you may never know why, but it may very well be that that form caused you to dodge a bullet. Now, they may fill it out and they may say, hey, can we talk? I do have this conviction, but I'd really like to talk to you about it because I would still really love to come to work for you. Again, opportunity for a dialogue, opportunity for them to explain it to you and for you to make some decisions. By the way, there's some rules about that. So if that comes up for you, give me a call or send me an email and let's talk about it because there's some rules about how that has to go. Okay, so part of what I want you to also be aware of as we're going through this process, and I think I may have skipped a page in the handout, is, let me see if I did skip a page. I did. So back to page 12. Part of what I want you to think about as part of this interview process and even at the offer stage is that employees have a right to privacy, right? Well, so do candidates. And the way that right to privacy works is it's a balancing scale. And the reason I'm referring you to page 12 of the handout is because this is my new hire checklist, but it sort of helps you to see how that right to privacy works. So the very beginning stage, pre-hire, employees' right to privacy is really high. Your right to invade that privacy is really low. So you can do things like get the resume, ask about their education, verify their education, verify their references. Those are all perfectly acceptable things pre-hire. Now we're extending the job offer, right? We have this conviction history information here. Now that we're extending the job offer, we're allowed to ask a little bit more. We're allowed to ask about the criminal history. At this stage, you are now allowed to do a background check. At this stage, you're now allowed to do a pre-employment drug test, if you, not you do it, but have it done if you choose to. At this stage, you're allowed to have a pre-employment job-related physical examination done. So maybe you have a position for a dental assistant and you just want to make sure that they can be on their feet all day long, that they can lift, that they can twist, that they can bend. And so you always send your dental assistant candidates for a pre-employment job-related physical examination. This is the point at which you're allowed to do that because that right to privacy is moving a little bit. Now that you're extending a job offer, you're allowed to get more information. After they're hired, now you're allowed to get a little more information. Obviously, now you're getting information on their, you may ask for employee information like, what's their birth date? It includes the year, their social security number. You may ask for emergency contacts. You may ask if they have any dependents, if you have insurance and they're applying for insurance. I-9 form. The I-9 form asks them, are you a citizen? If you're not a citizen, do you have authorization to work? So again, that's a little bit more information. W-4 form has a little bit more information. Now we know, are they claiming dependents? So again, that right to privacy shifts as time goes on, but it never really moves all the way. Even while they're your employee, they always have a right to privacy. And you always want to be careful that you're not invading that you're not asking questions that frankly aren't your business and you don't have a right to know and could eventually get you into trouble. So again, right to privacy, balancing act changes as we go. At this offer stage, you're allowed to do a background check. You're allowed to get criminal history information. And background checks are pretty easy to do now. You can, there's providers that do it all online. The candidate may not even have to fill out any paperwork. You just give them the login information for your account. They go in, they fill out all the stuff online. They get all the notice of consent forms online. They do it all, and then it gets done. So, okay, moving on. The offer. Are there conditions to that offer? Again, have you not done the reference checks yet? Maybe they said, you can check all my references except my current employer because they don't know I'm looking. So at this point, you might say, okay, now that we're extending the offer, it is conditional on us doing a reference check with your current employer. So let us know the point at which we are allowed to do that. And I'm going to recommend that you do that because you want to know what that current employer has to say. And, you know, if they're working, granted, they're going to have to give notice, and it's going to be a little nervous making for them because they know that the offer is conditioned on that. But I still recommend that you do it. If you have not already verified their education and their registration and licenses, do so now. I've had dentists who've hired hygienists and dental assistants who said that they were currently valid licensed and they weren't. So you want to make sure it's super easy to do. Just go online and check it. And any other conditions that you have pre-employment. All right, congratulations, you're hired. Before we jump into onboarding, do we have any questions?
We do have a question in here. It says, can you offer different employees different packages based on their needs? For example, we have 2 employees who don't have young children, 4 that do. Can we offer the older ones more vacation and the younger ones help with childcare?
You absolutely can. The way that I would probably do that is I would probably say, here's the benefits that you can choose from. Choose any one or choose 2. And maybe ahead of time, you'll do the financial analysis to make sure that it kind of balances out financially speaking. But you may say, here's 5 options. We'll contribute $200 a month towards your pet insurance, towards your child care, towards your health insurance for your dependents, because we already pay for yours. Or we only pay half yours. You can use it for, more for your own. Or if you, instead of doing those things, you would like to elect to have whatever, again, however that math works out, an extra 2 days of paid time off, you can do that. Or you can choose 2 weeks of unpaid time off. So yes, absolutely. But I would probably do it as sort of a cafeteria plan and let them choose which 1 or 2 or 3 things are most important to them. But yeah, you can do that.
Perfect. That was the only question. Folks, just a reminder, if you have any questions, as you can see, Anita does address them during the meeting. So feel free to put them in the Q&A. Thanks, Anita.
Perfect. Okay, let's talk for a few minutes about onboarding. Too often, not terribly often, but too often, when we have a problem down the road, and I ask that dental office or that dentist to forward to me the personnel file. They either tell me we don't keep personnel files, we don't have personnel files, or they send me like 3 pieces of paper. And that is not a personnel file. Now, here's the problem with that. Everything is evidence, including the lack of things. So the lack of a personnel file is some evidence that you probably aren't crossing your T's and dotting your I's and doing things the way that you should be doing things. It's probably some evidence that you are not paying attention to making sure that you're doing all the things in the hiring process that you should be doing, in the management process that you should be doing, perhaps even the termination process that you should be doing. Personnel files should exist for every single employee beginning the day they begin work for you. On page 17, I've given you this list that's on here on this PowerPoint. The same list is on page 17 of all the things that should be in a good personnel file. How long do you have to keep it? Because that's usually the next question. There's also things that should not be in the personnel file. They should be in other files. So if you're calling me or you and I are emailing back and forth, and so you have documentation to or from your lawyer those never, ever, ever go in the personnel file. Those are confidential attorney-client communications. There should be a separate legal file or a separate file of some kind. Those do not ever go into a personnel file. Medical information on that employee also should not be in their personnel file. It should be in a separate, highly confidential medical file. We like to see the I-9s in a separate I-9 file. You can just have a binder or a file that has everybody's I-9s, only because it does have information that might allow discrimination. For smaller dental practices where you're the manager, you're the one controlling all the information and accessing it, it's probably not as big of a deal. If we're ever doing an investigation, so sometimes we do investigations because somebody's filed a harassment complaint, we usually keep those in a separate file, not in the personnel file. And anything that's not job related. Now, I don't mean that so expansively that if that person gives you a birthday card and you want to put it in the personnel file, you can. That's not what I mean. But if they're giving you things that are truly not job related and they're highly in their personal, those don't need to go into that file. So maybe somebody, what would be an example? Maybe somebody gives you a copy of some document that they're having to review as part of their divorce or part of their lawsuit on a car accident or what have you. And maybe that goes in a separate file. Maybe that doesn't go into the personnel file. Okay, how long do you have to keep documents? There's actually a new law on this year. I've always said you should keep them for at least 4 years post termination, but now there's a law that says you have to. So what I would say is if you once a year kind of go through and clear things out, then make it 5 years. But the statute of limitations on most things, maximum is 4 years. So for the most part, as long as you keep it for 4 years and some number of months, you're okay. I have a dentist who has a lawsuit that the employee's attorney filed back in September, but it was only just served this month. So if she'd thrown things away right at 4 years, she might not have had all the documents. So keep it for over 4 years. Page 18 kind of spells all that out for you. All right, let's talk about onboarding. So first day, first week, there are certain things that I want you to plan ahead to do. And I want you to do it for a few reasons. Number one, obviously there's all kinds of paperwork that needs to be done. Before that person walks in the door, I want you to have gathered it, have it ready, have it in a file folder to give them to fill out. I want you to do that for 2 reasons. Number one, because you need to get all the paperwork filled out. Number two, they are still getting their first impressions of you. And I want their first impressions of you to be, this is the way we do things. We plan, we prepare, we cross the T's, we dot the I's. It is not all fly by the seat of your pants. Even though we're super busy, we do things the right way. I want you to plan some orientation. Even if it's just you're going to plan to spend a half hour with them when they first come in the door, set aside that half hour. Give them a full tour of the office. Make sure that they know where everything is. Reintroduce them to everybody because, number one, maybe they didn't meet everybody. You may have had them come in on a day when everybody wasn't there. But even if they did already meet everybody, they may have interviewed at 3 or 4 places. Reintroduce them to everybody. Reintroduce them by the person's name, by what the person does. Make sure that they know who everybody is and they're not having to pretend that they know because they're too embarrassed to ask. Maybe in that orientation, you're going to talk a little bit more about your practice and about your priorities and about kind of what your structure of how things go. You know, if you're an ortho practice, obviously it's different than if you're a perio practice. So you talk a little bit about kind of how things go. Again, just plan something for 20 or 30 minutes because I want them to know this is the way we do things. And I want you to make them comfortable from the time they walk in. I would recommend that as part of their onboarding process and their training, you have them shadow folks and have them shadow folks who aren't even doing the job that they're going to do. If you have a dental assistant coming in, sure, you're going to have that dental assistant shadow a dental assistant for a while, but also have them spend a day shadowing the front office so they know exactly how the front office runs and what software we use and how we check people in and out. They may be covering for your front office person during a break or during an absence. You may eventually want to cross-train, but in any event, let's have them shadow and get to know how everybody does their jobs. You may have a hygienist. Have that hygienist shadow you for a day and see how you treat your patients and how you interact with your patients. Have them learn the personality and the culture of how you do all that from you. So plan for some job shadowing, plan for whatever the training is, plan for when that paperwork's going to be done. Here, I'm going to give you some paperwork. We're going to set aside some time at the end of the day, but let's have you jump in even before you do the paperwork and start meeting with some folks and doing some shadowing. And then why don't we plan at 3 o'clock? You're going to stop doing that and we'll have you sit down and start doing the paperwork. Again, plan for the end of that day to say, and maybe, and we're going to end the day at about 5. My last patient should be done by about 4:30. As soon as my last patient's done, let's you guys sit down for a few minutes and just talk about how your first day went and how you're feeling about things. I want them to get a good first impression of you. I want them to know this is the way we do things. And I want them to have a good introduction. I want them to go home that day and say, I had a really good day. Because so often we go home from that first day of work and we tell our folks, our spouse, our friends, our roommates, oh, it was horrible today. I don't know if I'm going to make it. My daughter just started a new job a month ago. Her very first day, she's telling me, yeah, my goal going into this had been to make sure that to hang in for at least 1 year. She said, now I'm making it 30 days because it was such a bad first day because her manager not only did none of that, but he completely threw her under the bus and said, she's coming in as a manager and said, here's your team, introduce yourself. He didn't tell her he was going to do that. He didn't tell the team he was going to do that. And by the way, one of the team members was someone who wanted her job, right? On her very first day, she'd already decided instead of her goal being 1 year, her goal was 1 month. Do not have your person going home that day saying they had a terrible first day or they had a terrible first week. Make them feel welcome, make them feel comfortable, let them know this is how we do things. We communicate, we work together, we're a team, we support each other, have them be comfortable right from the start. All right, as part of that new hire paperwork, I have begun including a basic confidential and proprietary information agreement, and I'm giving that to you at page 19 because far too often at the end of the employment relationship, particularly with producers, with your dentist and your hygienist, we have them trying to steal patients. So right from the get-go, we want them signed on and knowing that we take very seriously our confidential information, our patient information. All right, now the fun begins. I'm guessing, I don't see anything in the Q&A. I'm guessing we don't have any questions on onboarding. Andrew, I'm guessing that whatever's in the chat is not questions, right?
That is correct. Yeah, and there are no questions presently.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll move on. All right, now the fun begins. So now we're getting into what I call the active management section of our talk today. And I call it that because we have the option of being an active manager who's very present, who's very involved, who's actually managing their own business, or we have the passive employer, which means somebody else is running your business because the business does not run in a vacuum. And very often we have dental offices where we have the queen bee, right? I know that's a horrible term, but historically it's a term that's been used for sort of the person who runs the office. And it may be a hygienist, or it may be a front office person. It might even be a dental assistant, might be an associate dentist, but it's somebody other than you. And it's somebody other than you because in my experience, I don't know why this is the case, but it seems to be the case, dentists tend to be more passive in running their business. They don't actively manage their employees. They don't actively become the leader. They don't actively become the boss, the manager. And in that vacuum, somebody else will probably do it. And it may not be the person who you want to do it, but it's going to be the person who's the strongest personality, who's the most intense, who's the most control freak, who's the most wanting to run things their own way. Don't give up that role to somebody else. Be an active manager. So active management, we're going to talk about the 3 strikes: failure to communicate, which is the same thing as rewarding bad behavior. Strike 2, failure to document events when they happen, which may mean that you will not have the evidence that you want to have if things go south. Strike 3, failure to give written notice before termination. Without documentation, without termination information, That attorney that employee goes to may be very excited to take that employee's case against you because you have not done a great job of convincing them that they're not going to make any money in this case. So let's go into those things in a little bit more detail. But before we do, I want to talk about two kind of overriding factors that I'll remind you of as we go along, but I want you to keep in mind in all of these things. The first is praise the positive. Much of what we'll be talking about for the next, 20 minutes or so is the problem employee, right? When we're talking about communicating, we're talking about documenting, oftentimes we're talking about the problem employee, but we're not always. And I don't want you to forget that. I want you to remember to praise the positive. When we're thinking about credibility as a leader, credibility as a boss, credibility as a parent, credibility as a spouse, credibility as a friend. When you're a person who only ever complains and you don't give credit where credit is due, you lose credibility. People don't listen so much when you're only complaining. So I want you to be thinking about praising the positive, not just counseling or complaining about the negative. Don't forget to do it. If it even occurs to you, if the thought even occurs to you as you're going through the days of, oh, he did a great job on that, assisting, like really anticipating what instruments I was going to need, or she did a great job handling that patient who was so mad about insurance not covering her bill. If that thought even occurs to you, say it, speak it, tell that person, praise the positive. Even the worst employee, you should be praising the positive. And we'll talk about more about that as we go along. Second, with respect to almost everything we're going to talk about, I want you to be specific in your communications, not just general. When you say to somebody, you're constantly late, that person is probably not constantly late. They may usually be late, but they're not constantly late. And when you say things like, you're constantly late and that's not acceptable, what are they going to say back? No, I'm not. I'm not that late. I'm not late all the time. If, on the other hand, you say, out of the last 2 weeks, we've had 10 working days and you've been late 7 of them, that's not acceptable. They might be like, oh, really? 7? Oh, I didn't know it was 7. Be specific when you can be specific. I get that it's easier said than done, but when you can, I want you to be specific. Tell them what you're really communicating to them, not just generalizations. All right, let's jump in with strike 1, failure to communicate. My theme here is do it immediately and do it often. The end of this story is if you do it immediately, you probably will be doing it often, because if you're communicating when you think of things, you're probably communicating pretty often, which is great. That's what we want. Okay, so do it immediately. Let's talk about that for a minute. You're all dentists. Well, most of you are dentists. I think we had a few spouses and an office manager on today, but you've probably been to college enough that you took Psych 101. You've probably heard of Pavlov's dogs. Pavlov's dogs taught us behavior, consequence, behavior, consequence, behavior, consequence, not behavior, time passes, consequence, right? Human nature, not just human nature. Even when we're training our animals, you go to a dog trainer, they're going to tell you, as soon as that dog does that behavior, you give the consequence, then you give the reward. So not to compare employees to dogs, but anything along these lines, the sooner the consequence occurs to the behavior, the better off you are in terms of molding that behavior or affecting that behavior. So when we're talking about praising the positive, do it immediately. Mrs. Jones came in and she was so mad because insurance wasn't covering the bill and she was so frustrated. And I heard you calm her down. I heard your voice go quiet. I heard you say to her, I am so sorry, Mrs. Jones. I totally get why you're frustrated. Let me explain to you what they're saying and let's see if we can work something out, right? I heard you bring that down and bring her. And so by the time she walked out the door, she was happier than she was 10 minutes before. Thank you so much for that. We're praising the positive. We're doing it immediately. We're being specific. And I'm going to throw in one more thing. Praise in public, counsel in private. When you're praising, if you can, praise in front of other people, praise in front of their coworkers. Let everybody else say, oh my gosh, yeah, Mrs. Jones, when she came in to get her teeth cleaned, she was still like ranting about the insurance thing. And then I heard like when she walked out and she was talking to you about it, like you totally calmed her down. Praise in public. Let everybody be part of that praise experience. I know that you can't always, and I know that there's times where it's just not appropriate, right? You may be praising the employee who handled another employee's problems really well, and so do that in public, right? So praise in public when you can, praise immediately, and be specific when you can be specific. Same thing with counseling negative behavior. Again, it's still behavior consequence. You have an employee who's not doing something the way you want it done. You have somebody who's not doing something timely when you've asked for it to be done. You have somebody who you've already corrected and they're not getting it. I want you to be communicating immediately. You know, think about raising kids. The same concept applies. And you're a parent to your child, you're a leader, you're a boss to your employee. When you're getting mad at your kid for something they did a week ago, something they did 2 days ago, it doesn't have the same impact as if you're talking to them the day that it happened, right? If you're praising your child for doing great in school, did fabulous, they were in the play and they were so good in their role. If 2 days later you said, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell you, I saw you play, it was great. They're like, oh yeah, right, that was 2 days ago. The excitement is immediate. The consequence will have an impact immediately. So praise immediately, counsel immediately, don't delay. Let me give you another example. You have an office manager who you've been asking to get receivables more current, right? And so you've said to her, here's how I want you to do it. I want you to make these phone calls and send out these letters. And I'd like to have it all that done within 30 days. And 30 days comes and goes and it's not done. And she says, oh yeah, I haven't had time. And you're like, oh, okay. And then, okay, try and get it done this month. Month goes by, it's still not done. You're like, oh, okay. If after that very first 30 days you had said, you know, when we talked, I told you it was my priority that this be done. And I told you I wanted it done this month. And I'm really not happy that it's not done. So for February, it is a priority and I need you to get it done. And if you're not being able to get it done because of the schedule or you don't have time, then by February 15th, I need you to come to me and I'm going to have an assistant come cover the front for some period of time so you can get this done. This is my priority, right? That communication was immediate. The very first time she missed that deadline, you communicated with her that you were not happy about it. You're setting a new target. Here's how I want you to solve the problem to make sure that it gets done. And hopefully now she got the message, ooh, he really meant it. He really wants it done. Like he immediately told me. If on the other hand, 3 months from now, you're saying, you knew I was mad when it wasn't done the first month, and you knew I was mad when it wasn't done the second month. And now here we are at month 3 and it's still not done. Like, I can't believe that you've ignored me all that time. Well, saying you knew I was mad or you knew I was unhappy is meaningless. It is just as meaningless as saying, I don't need to tell my spouse why I was unhappy. He knows that I was mad. Any therapist will tell you, no, he doesn't know why you're mad. In fact, he thinks you're not that mad. It's not that big of a deal because you pouted for a day and then it was over, right? So you walk around your dental office, pouting at your office manager for a day and then it's over. That office manager does not connect her behavior to the consequence. Communicate immediately. Do it often, be specific about what you want, and if appropriate, how to get it done. Hopefully that's going to help you to be better managing your folks. Hopefully it's going to help them to better respect you as a leader, respect you as a manager, and do what you want them to do, the way you want them to do it, when you want them to do it. Now, little bit of a sideline here. It is a very strange phenomenon that occurs. That's strange in some ways, and some it's totally predictable. That when you have an employee who's not doing well, they become protected. All of a sudden, they become protected. Oops, I slipped in the back room when nobody was looking, and now I have a workers' comp injury, right? That's probably the one that's not the big shock. The one that happens more often than you would think is all of a sudden they're pregnant, right? Highly protected. All of a sudden there's a medical diagnosis that you didn't know about before that is a disability that you now need to accommodate. I want you to be communicating immediately so that if the time comes that you need to do some disciplinary action and terminate employment, you're doing it sooner than later. The longer it drags out, the more likely that that person has an opportunity to become protected. Now, if you have somebody who's bound and determined to lie and pretend they had a workers' comp injury or do something, there's nothing you're going to do to prevent that. But it is unfortunately not uncommon that I get a call from a dentist saying, hey, Susie's been here for about a year. She hasn't been fabulous, but it was better than not having anybody here. And I know I should have done something sooner and I didn't, but it's getting worse now. And by the way, she also just told me that she's pregnant. Susie should have been counseled. Susie should have been communicated with. Susie should have had all sorts of things happening to try and modify whatever was going wrong for all this time. And even though you're desperate to have staff in there, if Sally really, did I say Sally, really just wasn't working out, then cold-hearted as it may seem, I'm going to recommend that you get rid of people sooner than later. The longer you drag it out, the more problematic it becomes, the more tension is created throughout the entire dental practice, and the more of a chance for that person to become protected. Again, one of the things about dentists that I've seen over and over is that part of that, sort of more passive personality that has you not necessarily actively managing your staff goes along with you hate confrontation. You hate the discomfort of that confrontation. The confrontation doesn't have to be super harsh. I am a huge fan of honesty. I am an absolute opponent of brutal honesty. Honesty never needs to be brutal. Honesty should never be in anger. Honesty should not be in frustration. If you're communicating immediately and you're communicating often, then you're communicating before you get to that point of frustrated and angry. You're communicating right away. So hopefully it's far less confrontational and far less uncomfortable when you're doing it sooner than later. And honestly, you'll get used to doing it. You'll get to know sort of yourself and how you can do that in a way that is more comfortable. And maybe what's more comfortable for you is saying, hey, let's talk for 5 minutes at the end of the day. Or, hey, come in 5 minutes early tomorrow morning. I want to chat with you. And you're going to it can be quick. It doesn't have to be long drawn out. You know what? I know that you were frustrated yesterday. I was frustrated yesterday, but here's what I need from you in the future. I need you when you're frustrated. I need you to just call me aside and say, I need to talk to you. And I need you to tell me what you're frustrated about, because what ended up happening was you snapped at me when we were treating Mrs. Jones yesterday, and that was not acceptable. And I understand now, because you told me that you were frustrated that I, whatever, and I apologize. I'll be more aware of that in the future, but I need you to not communicate that way, particularly in front of patients. You call me aside, and that's how we need to do things. Got it? Got it. It can be a quick conversation. It doesn't have to be long drawn out, but communicate immediately, communicate often, praise in public when you can. Always counsel in private. Now, it may very well be appropriate for you to have a witness present. I'm not saying it needs to be just the two of you. I'm saying you don't do it in a public setting where multiple people hear. Certainly never, ever where a patient hears. So if you need to have somebody else present, you can ask your person to be there, or you can ask a person who you think that employee trusts. You can have somebody be present with you. I'm absolutely a fan of that when it's appropriate, but praise in public when you can. Always counsel in private. I guess the only exception would be is if something super extreme happened. If that employee is having a fit, throwing a fit, temper tantrum, yelling, then you obviously need to immediately, even in public, do something to stop it. But what we're talking about is the normal day-to-day kinds of things. Okay. Reminder, praise the positive, be specific. Strike two. So hopefully I've given you some things to think about in terms of communicating with your staff, right? Communicate immediately, communicate often. It can be quick. Now I'm going to move into a more difficult thing for you, because I know you're all super busy documenting things when they happen. My theme here is the good, the bad, the ugly, but how? So I want you to think about in your communications, not in your communications, I want you to think about when you're doing these communications, documenting that you had the communication. I know that you can't document everything. I know that you can't document every time you say, hey, good job. But when there's anything that's really specific, when there's anything that's really important at all, I want you to document it. And we'll talk about ways that you can document it that hopefully will work for you. Documentation is important for a number of reasons. It's important partly so that when you're doing performance evaluations, performance reviews, and you're thinking about giving raises, or you're thinking about giving, maybe you're going to give somebody a bonus. You know what, Susie, this month was a tough, busy month, and I asked you to do that receivables project for me, and you still got it done. And that, I so appreciate that. I'm giving you a $100 bonus. Spend it however you wish. I just want to thank you for that. I want you to document that she got that project done in a timely manner. I want that to be something that is rewarded. I want that to be something that's praised. Documenting it then reminds you a year later when you're doing evaluations that happened. And it reminds you of what happened 6 months ago. It reminds you of what happened 3 months ago, including the bad stuff. So when you're thinking about raises, you're thinking about bonuses, you're thinking about performance reviews, your documentation is going to be helpful to you for that purpose. That's not even the most important reason. I also want you to have it so that at the end of the employment relationship, when that employee's gone and you thought you had a great relationship with them, you thought they were super happy, you thought that they were just leaving because they were moving to Colorado, or they got a fabulous job offer and couldn't say no, or they got tired of doing the 1 hour drive and they're going to work somewhere closer. You may get a request for records. You may get a request for the personnel file, the time records, the wage statements for that employee because you didn't even know there was something they were unhappy about. And that happens more often than you might think. So when they get that personnel file, I want them to see the documentation of the good things, and I want them to see the documentation of the bad things. I want that to be a file that tells a story of their employment relationship with you. And when they take that file to their lawyer, or it may be going to the lawyer may be who requested it, I want that file to tell the story to the lawyer. It may be that they're filing a discrimination claim against you, right? And they're going to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, and the DFEH. And the DFEH is going to ask for a copy of the personnel file. I want the personnel file to tell that DFEH investigator the story of their employment with you, so that investigator will know, oh, look, there were warnings, there were verbal counselings, there were things that happened that led up to that termination that helped me to see that termination wasn't because she was pregnant. That termination was because she kept making mistakes, and they asked her to please do better, and the mistakes kept continuing. And I can see what those mistakes were in the personnel file, and I can see the 3 times that he verbally counseled her. I can see the 1 time that he wrote her up. I can see the final written notice. That is all going to be evidence that's going to help you. The absence of it is evidence against you. It's not just that there's no evidence. It is evidence against you. Because if it was not important enough to document, then the argument goes, it wasn't important enough to have fired them for. If it wasn't important enough for you to take the time to put documentation in their file, then it begs the question, was it really the reason that you fired that person? You didn't even take the time to document it, but you fired them for it. Begs the question, what was the real reason that you fired them? So I want that personnel file to have the documentation, the good, the bad, the ugly. By the way, the good, obvious. The bad, obvious. What is the ugly? The ugly is when there's something that was really extreme. The ugly may be one of those events that was so extreme that there's no warnings at all. You are fired the minute that it happens, right? You yelled at a patient. You threw something across the room when you were mad. Whatever it may be, the ugly, that's an immediate termination. That we want documentation to follow that happened. And when it's something like that, I'm going to recommend that you have anybody who witnessed the ugly, who heard it, who saw it, ask them to please just write out, handwriting, typing, whatever they want, what they saw, what they heard, and that goes into that same file. So when that DFEH investigator gets it, they get not only your version of it, but they get the office manager who heard it and the dental assistant who saw it. They have notes from those people also of what happened. So Let's talk about how to document. Documenting can be any way that you want it to be, but think about it and choose a system that will work for you. So, for example, I have clients who type emails to themselves. Subject line, I don't care what the subject line is, but make it consistent so you can search your emails later to get it. Maybe the person's last name, maybe an employee number, maybe whatever it is, pick something so that when you search subject line for York, right, everything comes up. You know, those are all the emails that you've sent yourself about York. Good, bad, maybe ugly. I have clients who have their spouses that do the admin, right? So one spouse is the dentist, one spouse is the admin. The dentist who's the spouse who's the dentist sends the emails to the spouse. Same thing, choose consistency for that subject line. Spouse who does the admin knows, oh, that goes in York's personnel file. Or if you just want to save it electronically, that's fine. Set up a separate file folder electronically. That goes in the York file folder. The nice thing about doing things like emails is it automatically has who wrote it, right? It has whoever sent the email, and it has a date and time stamp. So we know we have evidence that it was done what we call contemporaneously. It was done at the time that the event occurred. So I think that's a super easy way, even for those of us who constantly carrying our little iPhones around with us, we can really easily just jump right on and do an email on our iPhone. It can be one sentence. Susie handled Mrs. Jones really well today. You'll know what that means. If you have the ability to say more, great, say more. But at the very least, get something documented. I think emails are a great way to do it. You may want to jump on your computer at the end of each day and just type out kind of a little journal entry. Here's how today went. And it may be, here's how today went with everybody. It may be other things other than just the employee's information in there. That's fine. We'll suss that out later. We'll go through that later and pick out the things that we need to that were about that employee. You may be somebody who likes to keep a written journal, right? Our general manager at a law firm always walks around with his one of those journal notebook things, and everything's written in there. That's fine. Again, we can go through that later and redact out the irrelevant stuff and show all of the relevant stuff. You may use an Outlook calendar and you like doing that. Put it right on the Outlook calendar. Again, that gives us a date and time stamp. It's your calendar. We know that you're the one who wrote it. I had a case many years ago for a dental team, a dental practice with 2 dentists, 2 offices. They also had a dental consultant. And what they would do is they would take before they computerized their patient charts. And so at the beginning of each patient chart, they had a patient treatment log. And they just took that patient treatment log. It's still called patient treatment log, and they just stuck it in every personnel file. And so in that patient treatment log, both dentists and the consultant could write notes. I don't care what it's called. It could be called, my shopping list. I don't care what it's called. It had all the substantive information that we needed because both dentists and the consultant had been writing in there every time they were counseling this employee about things that were happening. That was crucial evidence that enabled us to settle a case for very low money. In a case where, and I'm going to tell you about that case for just a minute because it's a good example. This is a case where they were terminating an employee who'd been doing a bad job for a long time. And they'd been waiting until they could find somebody to replace her. So they finally, which is problematic, by the way. So they finally found somebody to replace her. Now they don't really have a trigger reason to fire her. They're firing her because it's convenient for them. They found somebody to replace her. And they decided that they were just going to change the locks rather than get her key back because they really didn't trust her. So they called a coworker that night to say, hey, we're terminating Sally tomorrow morning, so we're changing the locks. So just so you know, when you come in tomorrow morning, your key won't work. So instead of coming at 8:30, come in at 9 and we'll be there. Please don't say anything to Sally. What did the coworker do? She immediately called Sally. Hey, you're getting fired tomorrow morning. What did Sally do? Sally immediately sent an email off to the dentist saying, I've been complaining to you about your sexual harassment for months now, and it has to stop. I've had enough. I can't take it anymore. It has to stop. She all of a sudden became protected. Now, they terminated her employment the next morning before they even saw their emails. but now this became a whole big lawsuit thing, right? So all sorts of things that were done wrong there. But the one thing that was done right is that they had a patient treatment log in her personnel file where all three of them had been writing notes about the problems and the counseling. And that solved that helped us take care of that case much faster, much easier than we might have otherwise. So whatever system works for you, just pick a system. You may want to just record into your cell phone, right? There's a little recording app. Record notes into it. Call yourself and leave yourself a voicemail message. You can type it out later. Whatever works for you, just come up with a system. And the analogy I always use here is, for many years, my hygienist would always say, again, me as a patient, my hygienist would always say, you don't floss enough, right? I never flossed enough. As soon as they came out with those little toothpicky things with the floss stuff in it, I floss all the time now. I keep a bag of those in my car. I keep them in my desk. I keep them in my bathroom. I keep them here at my desk. I keep them everywhere. And I floss now all the time because there's a system that now works for me. When my hygienist would tell me I need to floss more, I'd say, yep, I need to floss more, right? And I pull out the floss from my bathroom drawer for the first few days and I'd floss more. It was all good. But then it fell away because that wasn't really a system that was convenient for me. It wasn't a system that I remembered. It wasn't a system that was built into my everyday practice. So come up with a system that will work for you. Make it as easy as it needs to be for you to be able to successfully use it. Something is better than nothing. It does not have to be perfect. Whatever works for you will be better than not having anything. So while we're on this topic, I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about performance reviews because they are a form of documentation. They are a form of documenting the good and the bad. You're probably not going to document the ugly because, again, the ugly has probably been an immediate termination. But I want to talk about performance reviews for a couple of reasons. Number one, everyone hates them. I get that. So I want you to rethink performance reviews. Just like we're rethinking employee benefits for 2022, I want you to rethink performance reviews. There are many different formats. There's many different options. Whatever works for you, your personality, your culture, your comfort in communicating, come up with some way that works for you. So let me throw out a few options for you. It doesn't have to be any of these options. You can probably Google performance evaluations or performance reviews and come up with all sorts of different ideas. So there's the traditional way, right? We have the form, there's the ratings, we fill it out, we give it to the employee, and they basically get their score in different categories. I think this is a good option for new hires. I think this is a good thing to do at 30 days or 60 days, at the very most 90 days. Maybe you do it again at 6 months. For sure, you should do it again at 1 year. And if you like the using the format of the form with the ratings, that's great. Hand out pages 21 to 27. I've given you a sample. I think it's for a dental assistant. This can easily be modified. Again, it'll be in Word if you ask me for it. Change it to whatever is appropriate for your practice. Change it for your hygienist. Change it for your front office. Change it for your treatment coordinator. Change it for your lab technician. This is just sort of a template to give you an idea. But what I want you to really pay attention to is the ratings and properly using the ratings. And when you start using a form like this, I want you to train everybody so that everybody's on the same page. So the ratings on that form on page 21 down the bottom of the page tells you what those categories are. I'm going to turn to mine. Those categories are as follows. A 3 is basically the mid-range. A 3 is meeting expectations. It's where we expect you to be. There should be an assumption that on this form, everybody's a 3 in all categories as the basic foundation for a good employee. Now, a 4 means you are doing above meeting expectations. There's something you're doing that's special and that's great and that we want to acknowledge as being special and great. A 5, you're like walking on water in some way. You are just amazing and brilliant and absolutely fabulous. And there's something special about that thing that you do. Anytime you have a 4 or 5, there should be comments written. Why is it a 4 or a 5? Why is it exceeding expectations? Why is it more than just doing a good job? Similar concept for 2 and 1. A 2 is you're not meeting the expectations. Maybe we've talked about it before, maybe we haven't, depending on when this review is being done, depending on how long the problems has existed. But a 2 also better have comments. Why is it a 2? How am I not meeting expectations? If somebody has a 1 on something, I certainly hope there's been communication before now, probably some written documentation, written documentation to that employee, a written warning of some kind, because there should be some notice before you have a 1 on any performance review. But again, but needs to be comments, needs to be explanation of why it's a 1. And if it's a 1, their job may be on the line and they need to understand that. So use the ratings properly. And if you start using a form like this, have a staff meeting and explain to your staff, here's how the ratings work. So if you get all 3s, that is not a C when you, like a C when you were in school. A C means you're doing, average work, probably not doing great. A 3 in my rating system means you're doing your job. You're doing exactly what I want you to be doing. Now, once everybody knows how to use the ratings, if you're going to use a form like this, what we recommend is you have that employee do a self-review of themselves. And again, share with them. A 3 means you're meeting the expectation. 4 or 5, 2 or 1, you need to put in comments to me about why you're giving yourself that rating. And maybe you're giving yourself a 2 in something because you're struggling and I need to be helping you. I need to be giving you more support. I need to be giving you more training. I need to know that you're struggling in something. You're like, feel free to tell me if you feel like you're not doing well in an area, and let's talk about that. So you're going to train them on the ratings. You're going to have them do a self-review. You'll then do a review. If they have other supervisors in your practice, other supervisors will do the review. Again, I want all those ratings to be using the same system. And then you're going to put all that together. You're going to set up the time to have that performance review with them. And you may have some really good areas for discussion, particularly where your evaluation, your review is different than that employee's own review themselves. That's good information for you to have. That's important for you to know. All right. That's it for the traditional format. Again, you can modify those forms any way that you want. You can modify the ratings any way that you want. And we're definitely seeing companies move more towards ratings that aren't quite so harsh. If that's your culture and that's your comfort, you can change them to whatever you think is appropriate. Now on page 28 is a less traditional format. It's what we do in our law firm. And basically it's what I want you to think about in terms of this whole overall process anyways, which is the theme here is an intentional conversation about where we've been and where we're going. No matter what format you use or what structure you use or how you do these communications, the whole idea here is we're going to talk about where we've been, how it's going, how things have been the last whatever period of time this is evaluating, and where we're going. What does the future look like? What are your goals for next year? What are my goals for next year? What kinds of things do I want to see you improving on or learning or growing on? What kinds of things do you want to see yourself learning and growing in? It's an intentional conversation because we've set a specific day, we've set a specific time, we've set a specific plan for how we're going to have this discussion about where we've been and where we're going. So for us, we do this in a memo format. And every year, everybody, including us partners, are asked, just write a memo. Tell me how the year went. How are you feeling about things? Did you feel like you had a good year, bad year? Why? What are you looking forward to this year? Are you looking to, hygienists, are you looking to add more days? Front office, are you looking to learn more about billing? Dental assistant, are you looking to increase your status to extra functions, right? So where we've been, where we're going, no matter what the format is, that's the theme, that's the concept of the discussion. So memos don't have ratings. We have individual scheduled meetings. We talk about where we've been and where we're going. We give that employee the opportunity in the memo to tell us what they think they've done well, what they think they're struggling with. What's your happiness quotient is kind of the question, and what they're looking forward to in coming years, or even just next year. So some other recent trends in the last 5 years or so, we've heard a lot of talk about getting away from this whole concept of an annual review. And by the way, this is one of those things that trends every few years, right? So the trends change over time. And so the trend has been for this regular check-in instead of annual reviews. that's all well and good if you are the person who's going to do that. I am not. Most people I know are not. Most of us are way too busy trying to run our business. We're not going to set aside a time specifically to meet with each person once a month or probably even quarterly to do these check-ins. These check-ins are along the same line of this intentional conversation, but they probably don't have the memo, right? Are you really going to do that once a month? Are you really going to do that quarterly, semi-annually? If you do, and you will, more power to you. That is fabulous. You're a great leader. Your employees are probably pretty happy working for you. But most of us, that's not our reality. So think about what your reality is. Think about what your comfort is. Think about what's going to work for you, but come up with some way to have that intentional conversation at least once a year, if not more often. One of the other recent trends is 360 feedback, where basically everybody reviews everybody. Everybody gives everybody feedback on everybody. I think that's sort of an interesting idea, an interesting concept, but if you're going to do that, that is not an informal, just do it kind of thing. That is the kind of thing where you get the training, you give the training, everybody learns how to do the 360 feedback so that it's being communicated in a way that's not hurtful, that's helpful, that's constructive, that works for everybody. So if you want to do it, again, I think it's great, but do it right. All right. Part of the reason I bring up performance reviews in this strike two conversation is because you can also use the performance review concept at a non-traditional performance review time. So I'll give you an example. You remember the dental assistant, the legal assistant who I said we thought knew discovery and she didn't know discovery. And she came into us pretty young, 20, 21, 22, something like that, with not a lot of experience. And we decided we were going to train her. So about 6 months in, and she'd had a 90-day review, but about 6 months in, things still just were not happening. And she was not picking up on things. And the mistakes were just constant. And so we decided to use this as an opportunity for a 6-month review, non-traditional time. And so in this review, it was a senior partner's legal assistant, not my legal assistant. And he had been, the things that he'd been counseling with her verbally on the last 6 months, he'd actually been saving in a file. He had them documented. And so when he did this non-traditional performance review with her, he used the form and he went through, and here's the things that we've been talking about that are still twos, that are still not working out. And here's kind of a list of there were like 13 things that they talked about in the last 6 months that had been problematic, that weren't getting solved. And so they kind of had that discussion. And he said, so let me, in the context of all this, let me ask you this. Do you think this is a good fit? Do you want to be here? Do you like working in this job? Do you think this is the right thing for you? And she said, I really don't. I have been struggling, and I thought that I could do this, and I just don't think it is the right fit for me. And so it enabled that dialogue, which went very well. We agreed on her departure. She went away very happy, not having to be fired, right? She didn't quit. She wasn't fired. It was a sort of gray area mutual thing. We all agreed. And it worked out just fine. So I raise it here to, again, suggest that you think outside the box of what the expectation has always been. But in terms of communications and in terms of these tools, use them in whatever way might work best for you. It doesn't just have to be the same basic thing that we've always done. Use it in a way that works for you. All right, one more thing I want to talk about before we go on, that is disciplinary actions. I want to make sure that you don't have what's called a progressive discipline policy. So as we're talking about, verbal counseling, and we're talking about documenting, and in a moment we're going to talk about written warnings and final written warnings. I don't want you to ever have an employee handbook policy or even a verbal commitment or statement that promises certain steps along the way. If you work for the government, you may have a progressive discipline system. If you are a union member, you may have a progressive discipline system, because those are structures in which that is built in as mandatory. That is not you. You are a dental practice that has the option of using whatever disciplinary action is appropriate at any given time, with or without prior warnings. That doesn't mean I don't want you giving prior warnings. It means I don't want you committing yourself to any particular progressive discipline system. So on page 29, I've given you a disciplinary action policy that says, we may do certain things depending on what's appropriate, but there's no promise of any progressive discipline. So hopefully that just kind of cements that for you. All right, reminder in all things documentation, praise the positive, be specific. All right, strike 3, the failure to give written warnings. And my theme here is shape up or ship out. And the reason I'm going to give you this theme is for the following reason. Oftentimes when we're giving written warnings, sometimes it's a final written warning, we are at the stage of we're done. Like, I'm doing this because the lawyer told me I should do a written warning before I fire somebody, but this is really just checking that box. I'm done. I get that. And I get that we all get to that point with certain employees, certain folks. But when you're writing this written warning, I want you to fake yourself out, change your mindset to what if this person could shape up? What does that look like? And as you're writing that written warning, I want your perspective to be, what can I write that would help this person to shape up? And I want you to do that for 2 reasons. One, it's possible. And I'm going to give you another one of our stories when it happened. Blew us all away that it happened, but it worked. But the second reason I want you to do it is because I want the perception of the reader of that written termination to be not that this was clearly setting this person up to fail. I want the perception of the reader to be, these things were problems and this laid out exactly what they needed to do to turn around. Now, the reader will certainly be the employee, and they may just perceive it negatively no matter what. And there's nothing you can do about that. But the reader might be the employee's attorney, or the reader might be the jury, or the reader might be the Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board because they denied the unemployment and she appealed it. And now they're really looking at, look, looks like they gave her a chance. Looks like they really tried to give her a chance. Your voice will come through in that written warning. It almost always does. And the voice I want them to read is that written warning was intended to have them shape up, to have them turn it around, to give them one more chance to get it right, to convey to them how serious it is. And we want you to succeed, but this is what needs to happen for you to succeed. So on page 30 is a form, and in the right-hand column, it just kind of tells you the kinds of things that you would put in that right-hand column. Pages 31 and 32 are just samples of how a written warning might look. Page 33, you don't have to use a form. Use whatever works for you. Use whatever works for that particular circumstance. So page 33 is more of a narrative memo. Here's the things that we're explaining. Here's the things we're talking about. And again, maybe even more so in that kind of format, your voice is going to come through, and I want that voice to be, I want you to succeed. I want you to shape up. So here's my story. We hired the person who didn't know how to do discovery when our long-term legal assistant was leaving. And for many years, she just had a really negative attitude about doing anything that isn't my job, right? She was one of those people. It isn't my job. Not that she necessarily said those words, but she sort of found ways to never do anything that wasn't her job. We're a small law firm. Everything is everybody's job. If my assistant is busy because one of our partners is got a fine that goes today and I need something else done, any assistant should be able to help me. If the receptionist is busy and the phones need answering, any assistant needs to be able to answer those phones. Any attorney might need to answer those phones. We all have to work together. We all have to support each other. And this legal assistant was very focused on, that's not my job. And we were all really frustrated with it. We just kind of had it up to here. So came time for annual reviews, and senior partner said to every one of us attorneys, because we'd all been in to complain to him about something, he said, I want you to write out for me a memo that tells me what happened and how that impacted you. And so we all did. And we all gave them to him. And he very strategically planned her review for a Friday afternoon and the day, because he knew she was going to be very unhappy. And sure enough, she was very unhappy. And so when he met with her and he told her, in prior reviews, we've talked about the need to support everybody here and the need to work together as a team and the need to really communicate well. And we're just not seeing that happening. And I have to tell you that in this past year, I've had every single attorney come to me with a complaint about an interaction with you, some more than one. And so I've asked every attorney to write a memo to help us to help you to understand what impact that's had on them and what the specific event was that was most troubling to them. And so I'm going to give those to you and I'm going to ask you to think about it. And next week when you come back, I really want you to do everything you can to recognize in yourself when that's happening and to turn that around, because we need you to be supporting everybody. We need everybody supporting you. We need this to work together as a team. And I really hope that by sharing this information, I know it's going to be uncomfortable for you. I know it's not going to make you happy. I get that. But I'm hoping that by sharing this information with you, it's going to help you to really understand the perception that others have when these kinds of things happen. And I tell you, it changed. We were all blown away, but it changed. Now, for the first couple of weeks, she was very unhappy. She was very quiet. She didn't come in and say, how was your weekend? There was no bright and cheerful coming out of that work area. But she started to turn it around. And it was actually a visible, tangible change that when you said, hey, can you help me with this? She would say, I totally can, but I'm working on this for Craig. Can I do it for you in about an hour? Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I know for me, I then bent over backwards to praise her, not in a condescending way, but in a true, honest, thank you so much for getting that out for me. Not a huge, again, like roll your eyes, oh my gosh, you don't have to make such a big deal out of it, because we all knew she'd been chastised for it, but just trying to be appropriate and praising and thanking and being appreciative for when she did things. So I want your voice to be shape up, not ship out. I want the intention to be, what if magical things happen and this person can turn it around? And that's the voice that I want you to be using when you're writing these warnings. Okay, so we've talked about communicating, we've talked about documenting, we've talked about this in the context of a final written warning, putting this whole package together. When you have an employee who's sort of a normal average employee, but maybe not great. Again, I'm not talking about the ugly. I'm talking about the normal average employee, but maybe not great. I'm hopeful that by communicating immediately and often, that by documenting the things that you need to document and giving written warnings that are from the voice of Shape Up, I'm hoping that you'll be able to turn them around and have them be an employee that's good enough that you're happy to have them there, right? If that's not the case and they just can't turn it around, can't do well, or frankly, they make everybody miserable. And there are those people who just make people around them miserable. I want you to have the file, have the documentation, have the evidence that will support whatever action that you take, so that you can do that so that you can take that action with that comfort level of, well, I know I need to terminate. I'm going to hate that 5 minutes, but at least I know that I've got the documentation to back up to support the decision that I've made. In this context, I want you to do things sooner than later, even when it comes to terminations. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't give them the opportunity and you don't try to help them and support them and train them and counsel them so that they do better. But don't drag it out beyond where you no longer feel that it's workable. Partly because they may become protected, but partly because you may lose good people. It is not unusual for me to have somebody call me and say, okay, I need to fire John, and I've already lost 2 good assistants because they hated working with them, but now the time has come about to lose the 3rd one, and I don't want to lose a 3rd one. You shouldn't have lost the first 2, or certainly should have only lost 1 before you got more active in managing and perhaps managing out John. So I want you to think about doing things sooner than later, despite your discomfort. despite your dislike for confrontation, despite the fact that you would like to procrastinate and never do this and hope it takes care of itself. Sometimes it does, more often than not, it doesn't. And oftentimes, once you've finally taken that step and terminated that employment, you are so much happier. You're happier when you go home at night. You're happier when you come in the morning. And I promise you, every other staff member is probably going to be happier too. I just said promise and said probably because I'm a lawyer. I still want a loophole. Almost everybody's probably happier. Little extraneous thought. One of the reasons I like having people go on vacation, have them gone for a week, you learn things. You learn that the personality of the office changes when that person's gone. That may be your signal. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much of a negative impact Brenda's gossiping had on people. And now that Brenda's not here, people are talking and they're laughing and they're cheerful. And that doesn't happen when Brenda's here. That's really important to know. So pay attention to the environment, pay attention to the culture around you, and be an active manager in making sure that you are creating, you are leading everybody in having a workplace where we are all comfortable to be here. We all get praised. We all get counseled when appropriate. We communicate well with each other. We work well together. And if not, we deal with that sooner than later. We don't just wait until it becomes too difficult. I see this as being particularly relevant in a practice where you've purchased a practice, right? You've purchased a practice. It may very well be that people are not happy that you've purchased the practice. They like things the way they were. They don't want you to make any changes, and you're going to be making some changes. Or it may be that everybody's thrilled except that one person. Everybody's happy, everybody's fine, or everybody's just like, whatever, we'll see how it goes. But maybe that office manager is just not buying it because the seller was not an active manager. And so that office manager has been running this business for 30 years. And how dare you come in and change it? Don't let too much time pass before you're addressing those issues, dealing with it, making a determination. If it's not going to turn around, then end the relationship and move on. You will be happier. People around you will be happier. Doesn't mean don't give people a fair chance, but don't drag it out for too terribly long. All right. Active management, the 3 strikes: failure to communicate, failure to document, failure to give written notice before termination. Reminder, praise the positive, be specific. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. Does anybody want to have any questions at this point in time? All right, we'll continue on. You can throw them in. I'll catch them at the end if we don't, even if no matter what they're related to. All right, ended employment relationship and close to the end of our program. Voluntary quit, that's pretty easy. Somebody gives notice, they quit, or they don't give notice and they quit. Either way, they voluntarily left your employment. That's pretty black and white. Layoff, reduction in force. The main thing I'll say about this is never, ever claim that you are laying somebody off if you are not. A layoff means I'm laying you off and I'm not replacing you. Perhaps because I'm eliminating that position, perhaps because we just aren't that busy, perhaps because I financially have to cut somewhere and so I'm going to distribute your duties to other people, perhaps because I've got 3 dental assistants and it's just too many, I only need 2, whatever it is. A layoff means I'm letting you go, not necessarily because you did anything wrong, but I'm not replacing you. People often ask, well, then how long do we have to wait before we can replace them? If you're asking that question, then it's not a layoff, it's a termination. But the answer to the question is, there is no answer to that question. The longer, the better. If you rehire somebody in 1 month, then that wasn't a layoff, that was a termination. If you rehire somebody in a year, and the reason you're rehiring is if we look at your financials, we'll see that you've gotten busier. We look at your patient schedules, we'll see you've gotten busier and busier. Then that's fine. Then there's a reason why you eliminated the position a year ago and you need to rehire somebody now. But don't say it's a layoff if it's not a layoff. All right, involuntary termination. Can't I just say it's not working out? Yes, if you're terminating that employee pretty early on in their employment relationship with you. If they've been with you for 1 month and they're just not fitting in, and frankly, we've let people go in 1 week. Sometimes you know right away, this is just not going to work. Our most recent one was a new legal assistant, and she was complaining about our software. She was complaining about just everything was a complaint, unhappy about everything. That is not going to work. We let her go in 1 week. So decide soon with your new folks, and that in those circumstances, certainly I want you to counsel if you can. If it's appropriate, if there's something that they're just not, doing right, and you may be able to turn around, counsel if you can. The one I just gave you as an example, it was a personality thing, constant complaints. We were not willing to wait it out or to try. We were done in 1 week. If you do it sooner, you don't procrastinate, you can say that. Can you ever say, I'm letting you go because you're at will and I don't need to give you a reason? Lawfully you can, but I never, ever, ever recommend it. And I'm not saving a little loophole there. Never, ever, ever recommending it. And here's why. You're terminating their employment for some reason. There is a reason. Nobody terminates employment for no reason. And what at will says is you may terminate employment for no reason. You may terminate employment for a legal reason, but you may never terminate employment for an illegal reason. So again, if you go back to that DFEH list of questions not to ask, those are all protected categories. You may never terminate employment because you found out that someone is gay. You found out that they're Jewish. You found out that they have multiple sclerosis. You found out that whatever it may be, right? Any protected category. Those are illegal reasons. And there's lots of other ones, obviously. When you tell somebody, I'm terminating your employment, you're an at-will employee, I don't need to give you a reason, they know there's a reason, but they are not going to go home and say, I know the real reason was because I just wasn't that good of an employee. I wasn't doing a good job. I made a lot of mistakes. They're going to go home and say, they wouldn't give me a reason because they know that the reason was really because I'm pregnant or because I'm gay or whatever the protected categories are, right? So I always want you to have a reason. Now, in the best case scenario, you've been counseling, you've done some documentation. And so in that termination meeting, you can say, as you know, we've been talking about performance issues I've had with your performance in the last 3 months. I just haven't seen the turnaround that I need. And therefore, I decided to terminate your employment effective today. Now, we don't have to go through all of those reasons again, but I've given you the reason. If you don't know the reason, go back and look at your written warning. I've been giving you the reasons for the last 3 months, and I have not seen the improvement that I need. So that is a circumstance where you don't have to give a specific reason in that meeting. And that's part of why doing those things will help you in the long run, right? So hopefully what you can say is, we've been talking about the things. I haven't seen the improvement that I need. So today's your last day. Here's your final paycheck. Here's some information about unemployment insurance. Here's a notice of termination so that when you're applying for unemployment, they'll see that you will qualify. Let me walk out with you. I need to get your key and collect your things. And I wish you all the very, very best. By the way, if anybody calls for an employment reference, the only information I will give them is your dates of employment and your last position held. They will not be told anything about the nature of your termination of employment. Let's go ahead and walk out. Right? That can be a really fast 1 minute, uncomfortable, but brief conversation. That may not always be the case, and you may need to have to give some explanation of why the termination is happening. It may be that something happened, that you've done an investigation, and the investigation has resulted in a finding of whatever. But what I want you to be able to do in that final meeting, no matter what, is have it be a relatively brief conversation. Prepare what you're going to say, have that paycheck ready, have the paperwork ready, be ready to walk them out, and that's that. This is not the time for a lengthy discussion or argument or but I didn't or but you didn't understand. That should have already happened. This should be a pretty brief meeting. On pages 34 to 36, I've given you some termination documents. There's a checklist. These are the kinds of things you want to make sure that you have ready for the final day. Page 2 is just EDD requires that you give what's called a change of relationship notice. It doesn't have to be that. It can be what I've given you on page 2. And I like this because it reminds them you may not steal my patient information. And then page 3, if they'll sign it, they probably won't sign it when you're firing them, but if it's a voluntary termination, they probably will sign it. Just a reminder about that confidentiality information. Again, I want to do everything I can to make sure they know, do not steal our patients. If you are firing somebody, every cent, every dime, every dollar you owe them must be paid the day you fire them. So every expense reimbursement, every bonus, every hour of work. So what I usually tell folks is Even if you plan to fire them when they first come in the morning, pay them for 8 hours. Something might happen. You may get a flat tire and you don't get in first thing in the morning. So you're going to prepare that paycheck ahead of time. Just prepare it for the whole 8 hours for the full day. Terminate them sometime before the end of the day. You'll have that final paycheck ready. Pay them for all their PTO, pay them for all their vacation, anything else that you owe them. That should all happen on that last day. All right. Final, post-termination. References. Again, when you get that reference check, my preference is you just give dates of employment, last position held. If it was an absolutely fabulous employee and you want to say they were an absolutely fabulous employee, you can do that, but you may get yourself into a little bit of trouble later when a terrible employee wants to know why you won't say they were a fabulous employee. It may not, but if you have negative things to say, I would say just dates of employment, last position held, partly because you are always in the best position when your former employee has a new job. When they have a new job, they forgot that they're mad about you, they forgot to file a labor claim against you, they'll move on. So you're better off if they get a new job. Now, if they're unhappy or they think you didn't pay them right, you may get a document request from them or from their lawyer. When you get that document request, you have 21 days to produce their wage statements, their pay stubs, and their time records. You have 30 days to produce their personnel file. If you get a lawyer letter asking for it, I'm going to very strongly recommend that you reach out to an employment lawyer, whether it's me or somebody else, and have them review the documents and produce them for you so that that employee's lawyer knows that you have a lawyer. If you get the request from the employees, I still recommend that you do. It's always best to let us take a quick look first. Whatever page I gave you, the records retention and the personnel file information, that tells you the 21 days and 30 days. So it's in the documents in your handout. Certainly, if you get a claim notice of any kind from the Department of Industrial Relations, also known as the Department of Labor Standards Enforcement, or the DFEH, or the Labor Board, or whatever, do not procrastinate. There are time deadlines on all of those things. Seek legal counsel as soon as possible. If you get a lawsuit, somebody serves you with a lawsuit, do not procrastinate. Seek legal counsel. There are now subscription services, we subscribe to it also, that tell us all the filings that happen every day. And there are lawyers who their marketing plan is to send a letter to every employer when there's a filing. So the first then you may have a lawsuit against you, maybe a lawyer letter that says you've been sued, we'll represent you. No matter what, don't hesitate, seek legal counsel. You can call TDIC, they have panel attorneys. I'm on the panel. There's other terrific employment law attorneys on their panel. So get yourself a good employment lawyer when these things come up. Don't procrastinate. Okay, why does it all really matter? Here's the deal. It may very well be that you have an employee who, for one reason or another, even an employee who you thought you were on great terms with, who left and wrote your letter saying, thank you so much, I've learned so much, this has been a great opportunity. For some reason, they may someday come after you. They may find out that you were paying a daily per diem and weren't paying overtime and you owed them overtime. They may find out that you were paying bonuses and you weren't paying the bonuses right. They may, whatever. And they may decide, that's my money. Like I love Dr. York, but I'm entitled to the money I'm entitled to, and he didn't pay me right. She didn't pay me right. So anything can happen. And at the end of the day, when there's an adjudicator, right, or there's a plaintiff's attorney, what we look for is a few things. Number one, tangible evidence, documented evidence from the time that things happen is the very best evidence. And the lack of it is evidence against you. I'm going to beat that dead horse. Evidence that does not exist is evidence that it wasn't that big of a deal, is evidence that you don't comply with things, you don't cross the T's, you don't dot the I's, you're a little sloppy in how you do things. It's evidence against you. It's not just an absence of evidence. So documentary evidence done at the time is probably the most important. Almost as important, firsthand testimony. Hopefully you're going to have coworkers, other employees who are going to step up and say, yeah, Sally was a problem. I remember that she came in late every single day and we were all pretty unhappy about it. Sally's complaining she never got rest breaks. Sally was the third dental assistant. We only have one dentist. Sally got more rest breaks than anybody. In fact, we constantly had to go try and find where she was because she was constantly on rest breaks and using her phone. So firsthand testimony, critically important. If you're a good leader, you're a good boss, you're managing your employees well, they're going to step up and be good witnesses for you. If you're not, they won't. I've had more than one. In fact, I've got one right now, and I had one just in the last 6 months where the dentist thought the office manager would step up and support the dentist. And in 2 recent cases, it's happened before that, 2 recent cases, exact same scenario, office manager said, I can't lie for you. And that's not what happened. You did things wrong. So do things right, treat your staff well, lead them well, be aware of their perception of you, and hopefully they'll step up and be good firsthand witnesses for you. And last but not least, the world wants things to be fair. The jury, the unemployment hearing officer, the DFEH investigator, whoever it is, whoever is looking at what happened and trying to figure out what the story is, they want the story to have been fair. And if you're communicating often and you're documenting and you're doing written warnings and you're leading well, then an outsider looking in will say, that looked like they gave her a fair chance. That looked like he had every opportunity to turn things around. Looks to me like it was a pretty fair process. I've got documentation. I've got coworkers saying, he's a great boss and she was a problem employee. And it looks to me like they did things right. It was all fair. I don't see that the dentist did anything wrong here. That's what matters at the end of the day. And you truly don't know who might be coming after you. I had a new client dentist in my office this week. She was literally crying because this was the employee who's coming after her, his employee who she never, ever, ever thought would have been coming after her. I suspect that she doesn't have a good self-perception of how employees perceive her. And part of the reason I'm saying that is because this is one of the ones where her office manager said, I can't lie for you. And the dentist was shocked because she didn't know that it would be lying, right? She thought that the perception was she's a great leader, she's a great boss, she's kind to everybody. And that's not the perception. All right. Last in your handouts, 3 things I always remind you of. 1, good employee handbook, very important tool. It is part of crossing the T's, part of dotting the I's, part of being an employer who does things right, who's in compliance, part of the great evidence we'll be able to produce when that time comes. It also gives employees all the notices that they need to have. It communicates your expectations so that you can hold people accountable for following the policies. It helps you make decisions. Can I have a leave of absence? I don't know. Let's look and see what the employee handbook says. Harassment prevention training required for all employers in California with 5 or more employees. If you haven't done it in the last 2 years, you're late. We need to do it. In fact, maybe Andrew and I will talk about putting together one for later in the year. But even if not, make sure you're getting that done. I am co-author of a fabulous employment law 3-book series, if I do say so myself. It's terrific. I don't know that any dentist would ever read it. So if you're not the kind of person who's going to be inclined to read it, don't buy it. Don't waste your money. But one of the things it does have is as part of what you get is a link to online, about 100 forms that we have online for all of you. But again, if you're not going to read it, don't buy it. That's it for me. Do we have any more questions?
I don't see any other questions on the Q&A. I just want to point out a couple of things here at the end. She mentioned her service for the employee handbook. We use that here at the Phillips Group. We also, our predecessor, Phillips Accountancy, also use that service. It's incredibly comprehensive and it's fantastic. I know payroll companies do it too. Think whether or not you want a lawyer writing your legal forms or you want a payroll tech writing your legal forms. That's basically what I think about. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, yes, that harassment prevention training, hopefully, and Anita and I will discuss this later, we can put on some sort of thing for our clients for that.
Yeah.
Our next meeting is going to be February 25th. Hopefully you've signed up for it. If not, you can still do so. And I don't see any questions in the chat. Although here's a question. How do we get the handout in Word, not in PDF? And so for that person, I don't know if we have it in Word, but Anita, can you?
So I think, does the handout have my email address on it?
Let's see.
Right on the front page, bottom, my email address, email me. I will not send you the entire handout in Word, but I will send you the forms that are in Word. So just email me at that email address and ask me for the forms from today's program. I'm happy to provide it to you.
Perfect. All right. Well, again, Anita, thank you so much. I don't see any of the questions right here. And that person who just posted that said thank you as well. I don't see any questions. So
fabulous.
Thank you again for your help. All right.
Andrew, do we think we're going to try and do that one as an in-person and webinar? Do you think?
I hope so.
We'll see.
I hope that we can. Yeah. That's what I'm shooting for, but it just kind of depends on how things go.
So for sure, it will be available as a webinar, even if we're in person, but we're hoping to have it be where you can do either one.
Exactly.
Good weekend, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.